I'm here today with the absolute legend, Alma Katsu. Alma is a New York Times bestselling author, and her books have been nominated for and won multiple prestigious awards, including the Stoker, Goodreads Reader's Choice, and International Thriller Writers, and appeared on numerous best books lists. Her book, The Hunger, which is a reimagining of the story of the Donner Party, this is also the book I read on my honeymoon, was named one of NPR's 100 favorite horror stories. And as if that weren't enough, she also has over 30 years of experience as an intelligence professional at CIA and NSA. Welcome, Alma.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. And you read The Hunger on your honeymoon and you're still married.
I sure am. I mean, I also
Amazing.
read American Psycho on the beach, so I mean, my taste is questionable.
I don't think so. I think it's perfect.
Well, thank you. And I know that was kind of a long bio, but I also barely scratched the surface, so tell me what I missed.
I don't know. It's pretty weird. I've been doing this for 15 years now, published, and there's been a lot of ups and downs in that. So, we always, excuse me, highlight the good parts in the bio, but I've had every low you can think of too. It's a crazy, crazy business.
Well, I know you have a super interesting background, which I just introduced a little bit, from being an intelligence analyst to working as a technology futurist. And how would you say some of these experiences inform your writing and the stories that you decide to tell?
Well, and first of all, until I started writing spy fiction which was just a few years ago, I waited until I actually retired from the business to do that. I would have said not much, but an editor pointed out to me very early in my career that all my characters are really kind of duplicitous and
Mhm.
you never know what they're thinking and you find out that they're not who they seem to be. And she asked me, is that due to my career? And I had to stop and think, but she's absolutely right. It was from being in that environment, I think, that makes me see that side of characters. It
Mhm.
also makes me wonder if I just, I can't see the good side in anybody. I don't know.
I mean, that makes the books more interesting to read. I love kind of an unreliable narrator, or the feeling that I'm not getting the full story immediately, because then it makes me want to keep reading.
And isn't that really true in most books? I mean, even if
Mm.
it's not what you set out, people, if they're true to life, except maybe if they're 6 years old or something, most people don't reveal everything up
Mhm.
front. They're onions that you have to peel.
It's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
And
So I would say that's the big thing. The next book, which will be coming out the end of this year or towards the end of this year, Incarnate, actually deals with technology. So I got the chance to write a little bit about what I know. Although, to write good fiction, it's really hard to do that about technology. So it's not as
Mhm.
deep in technology as some people might think it would be. I'm a little conflicted over it, actually.
Do you think it's hard because lay people won't understand the terms, or because it would become dated more quickly? What do you think?
Kind of both. I mean,
Mm.
even in the writing of this book, which has to do with social media, but also deep fakes,
Mm.
because of some changes in generative AI that took place while I was writing the book, I had to make some changes in the book. And, as a futurist, I'm here to tell you that's just the way it always is. Like nothing happens and then boom, everything happens at once. And, you've got to change your thinking and all that. So that's part of it. But
Mhm.
also, I think for most people, descriptions of technology, no matter how well done they are just drags. They're just exposition, right? And really, you only need to know as much about the technology in order to understand what the story's trying to tell you. So that's, what I focused on. But I have this fear, that I'm going to be criticized for not being deeper in the technology or, doing these sort of magical hand waves to smooth over some things. And, but who's going to care really? Nobody.
That's true. People are there for the story, not necessarily the technology. So it sounds really cool just from the little you've told me. So I'm interested.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, hopefully it'll be intriguing. Early on in my so I about the last third of my career was in technology, emerging technologies, and kind of rolled into being a futurist, which is a forecaster. Basically, we
Mhm.
look at technologies and we try to decide which ones are going to be disruptive and advise on that. Although I kind of gave it up towards the whole end of my practice, it was all generative AI. So yeah, it was busy. It was very busy. And it's gotten to the point where it's not something that you can really follow very well unless you
Mhm.
invest a lot of time in it. And I just didn't have that time anymore. So I sort of stopped. and it's good because now it's completely batshit. But yeah, but one of the technologies I looked at, like starting in 2015, was deep fakes. So really, this story started out about deep fakes, and the technologies that go into deep fakes are not artificial intelligence,
Mm,
but there's some applications now. And so that's what ended up needing to be sort of changed a little bit in the
mhm,
story. And, as some of the editors involved in the process pointed out, most people, their brains are going to go to artificial intelligence anyway. So let's
mm.
just call it artificial intelligence. So I don't even know if the term deep fake shows up in the book, but that's pretty much what we're talking about. Is some really interesting developments happened a few years back, and
Mhm.
they are going to be upended by generative AI.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is like really nerdy shit that I'm interested in, but probably very few other people.
I'm interested. I'm very interested. My husband is also a computer engineer, so we talk about AI a lot. I am
Oh,
scared. Are you scared? Should I be scared?
I'm more angry than scared.
Mm,
So because of the job I had, so I worked very closely with IARPA, which is the
mm,
intelligence community's version of DARPA,
mm,
which is at the research end of the research to application continuum. But I also worked with InQtel, which is the venture capitalist for the intelligence community. And they were at the application end, they were talking to startups, new technologies that we needed to determine if there was a potential use for it in the intelligence community. So I've been dealing with Silicon Valley for a long time.
mm,
And and one thing you learn in being a futurist is that the people who envision the technology originally, if it gets to the point where a lot of people are going to be using it, that's where it really takes off and becomes
mhm,
disruptive. And they don't envision all of the potential uses. So I was super involved in social media from the beginning and did a lot of analysis of social media for the intelligence community. And then I went on to advise some social media companies. And um, what we have with social media now is a disaster. It's not what anybody thought it would be, right? It's just
mhm,
this mass tool of propaganda now and has affected societies around the world in so many bad ways that nobody had envisioned. And I'm
mhm.
concerned that that's where we're going to go with AI, because you have the
Oh,
same thing. You have a handful of companies that are very vested in it financially,
mhm,
on an order of magnitude several times over what the social media companies were at this stage in their development, and the pressure is on for the company that's going to rule the roost to become the Google, right, of
mhm,
artificial intelligence. So there's a lot of lying, cheating, and stealing going on right now. You're an author, you know about the stealing part,
mhm,
um, but a lot of the things they're saying to both regulators and to the public are misleading. The technology is not at the point where they try to say it is. Right now, they've turned away from being consumer facing and they're more business to business facing, and they're getting businesses to just stuff it into everything in our lives, whether we
mhm.
want it or not. And that's because then they get the data, right? They don't have to go pirating books anymore because we are pumping the data into the large language models now.
Mhm,
So anyway, yeah, I'm worried because we are living in a time where the public is not demanding government oversight of and regulation of these technologies, just like
mhm,
we did in social media. And then it's all in the hands of these commercial entities who are only going to do what's best for the stockholders, not
mhm.
not what's best for the public.
So, yes, I should be scared.
Should be scared, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, especially as an artist, as a creative, what we're seeing with AI writing books and AI producing art, that's scary.
Yes, it's very scary. And there's the debate about, what is art and
Mhm,
is what they're producing art. I certainly don't think so, because
mhm,
it's reinforcement learning. It's just machine learning
mhm,
from patterns that they're able to pull out of data. And I don't think you make art just by replicating patterns. There might be some
mhm,
artists, I guess, who disagree with that, right? Who've done great work and just by using patterns. But that's part of where we're at right now. But the other thing is that it still doesn't work well. It still lies a lot,
mhm.
hallucinates, and all that is being plowed back into the language models, so the training models, I should say. So we're getting what you call enshittification, right? The enshittification of the internet. Cory Doctorow is
Mhm.
right in this regard,
Mhm.
where all these falsehoods are being plowed back in to the repository of knowledge for us, the internet, right? We've trusted our memory and so many things to the internet, and now it's being befouled every day. What are we going to do? Where's truth? Anyway, yes, I didn't want this to get too depressing. Let's
I'm frankly very, very interested. So, but if we can get back on the writing track, although I really do love that discussion. Can you talk about how you first got into writing? Because you've had this career in intelligence. What made you think I want to write fiction and I want to write horror?
Well, I started out wanting to be a writer,
Mhm.
like almost every writer. I was one of these nerdy little kids whose best friends were books. And so early on, you want to try to write. And I
Mhm.
thought I would. I just had the opportunity to go work for the intelligence community. It wasn't like my ideal. I didn't study political science or anything like
Mhm.
that. Uh, and people are probably like shaking their heads. But back then, this was a long time ago, back then, particularly for the first agency I went to, the National Security Agency, the work is very technical in nature, and so they didn't even get that many people with degrees coming out of colleges for what they wanted. So they would test you for aptitude.
Mhm.
So I tested. They gave me I made a job offer. I thought I would just go for a few years to see what it was like, and so I ended up having this whole career. And I didn't get into writing until later in my career. So I was 50 when I sold my first book, which was The Taker, and that was probably more fantasy than horror, but it has this very dark side to it.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that's how I got started. And I didn't kind of gravitate over to horror proper until a little bit later in the writing career. But
Mhm.
there was always this sort of love of speculative fiction and
Mhm.
sort of dark fiction, and certainly the gothic, that I grew up with, that has stayed with me to this day.
For sure. Well, what is your writing process like? How do you get started? Do you have any writing rituals? What are you doing when you're staring at the blank page?
Isn't it terrible? And it changes all the time, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Like from
Oh,
book
yeah.
to book. And right now, I just finished handing in the manuscripts for two books, one spy novel and one, and for Incarnate, the next horror novel. And I, to my horror, found out that I had agreed to send stories to too many anthologies. So I have to write these short stories, which is not natural for me. So I'm kind of struggling with that question right now. Like I have to write these stories and they're themed anthologies. So it's
Mhm.
not like I can just write anything I want. And and so I'm asking me myself that question all over again. Where did stories come from? What am I going to write about? Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. And I also am interested in how you combine history with horror because I know a lot of inspiration comes from history. What kinds of historical events draw your interest?
Well, it's funny because The Hunger, um, it wasn't like I thought that book was the kind of book I was going to write for the rest of my career. And I didn't even think we didn't think of it as horror, like the editors and my agent. We
Hmm.
looked at it as more mainstream fiction because there's certainly a lot of fiction out there that has a little bit, right,
Sure.
of that in it. And you could argue that, and some readers have said that they didn't think there was like a ton of horror in The Hunger, that it wasn't what they expected. I
Mhm.
think they were expected more full blown walking ghouls or something like that. So when the horror community embraced it, and it became popular, of course, you know what an editor is going to say to you next. What's your next one?
Right.
So, we joked about it that they had to be like the greatest disasters of history, and so
Mhm.
what came next? The Titanic, of course. And then after that, it was a little tough because, so that's what I was looking at. I would
Mhm.
ask readers to suggest, what historical incident do you think would make a good horror novel? And it's a harder sweet spot to hit than you might think
Mhm.
because it can't be too small. I know that sounds pretty ghoulish, but,
Mhm.
like, a lot of people wanted something to do with the Dyatlov Pass incident,
Oh,
but
yeah.
it was interesting, but, it's just a handful of people, so,
Mm.
and it was happened in Russia, so American publishers, not so interested in it. There's that aspect too. Where in
Mhm.
the world did it happen? And, yeah, that's the commercial life. So at the time, though, um, the feeling in historical fiction was that nothing was selling very well except for World War II era books.
Hmm.
And I, my husband's family were interned. We knew a lot about the Japanese internment. So
Mhm.
when I pitched that idea, they were very happy with it. But and then there was the werewolf, the long short story I wrote for Amazon. That was set in towards the end of World War II when the Allied troops were about to cross over into Germany. But that's really it. I don't think I've written another historical since.
Yet.
Have I? Right. Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to write another Western, actually.
Ooh, I would love that.
They're fun. They're really fun, but I don't think they sell as well as publishers would like.
Hmm. Well,
Yeah,
it is a business after all.
it is a business.
Well, what is your research process like? Not just for your historical books, because I assume you have to do some research for every book. Where do you start?
Well, it is very different though for the historicals
Mhm.
than for other books. But in generally, it's for me, it's necessity driven. Like
Mhm.
I know the story pretty much what I'm trying to tell, and as I'm writing it, I may run up against things that I don't know.
Mhm.
Uh, I joke about it, but it's especially writing historicals. Like I never can remember when were matches just started to be
Mm.
used widespread, right? So I have to make sure that they're starting fires authentically.
Mm.
What did people eat for breakfast back then? That seems to come up a lot. Yeah, you're nodding.
Yep.
And trying to think. Those are probably the two biggest ones.
Mhm. No,
Maybe
that makes
something
a
to
lot of
do with
sense.
toilets. I don't know. But so there's always those kinds of little things in a book.
Mhm.
When I'm doing the spy novels, somebody gets on a plane, I go to orbits and I look up, what flights go between these two areas. So I
Hmm.
know, what airport they got to fly out of, what the duration is, what kind of plane are they likely to use, that sort of
Mhm.
thing. All these crazy little things. But I really don't let myself get sucked down the research rabbit
Mhm.
holes.
That's probably smart, otherwise you might just never start because you can never do too much research, I guess.
That's what a lot of people feel like, and I can understand it because it's
Mm.
fun. It's fun
Mhm.
to kind of broaden that world. And you also have this fear, right? That without it, my story is going to be dead or whatever.
Mhm.
But I mean, that's what I did in my career. I was a research analyst. So, I know from experience, it's really easy to kind of get paralyzed
Mhm.
and you can use that as an excuse to not get started. And as a fiction writer, the story is the most important thing. So I feel like, you cannot emphasize too much that the research takes a backseat to the story. And that's where your energy should be going.
Yeah. Do you feel like being an analyst or having a background in that helps you synthesize facts, I don't know, a little bit faster and put them into your story?
I think so, but I don't really have a way to judge that. I
Mhm.
mean, I just feel like that's true, but it's also has some drawbacks too. Like, I'm very logical. Well, my husband might not say
Mhm.
so,
Mhm.
but I'm pretty logical, and so that also makes me not very sentimental. And I found it's making it harder to sustain the magic in these stories, which have a large component of the unexplainable in them.
Mhm.
So yeah, that I struggle with maybe more than some folks do.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, I want to pivot a little bit because you have so many incredible books, but I want to talk about your most recent release, which is called Fiend. I
Mhm.
just finished it, loved it. Can you give us a short kind of introduction to that book and what it's all about?
Gosh, I just thought about it. I should have put Fiend up behind me on the
Ah.
wall, the cover. I'm an idiot. I've kind of fallen out of it. The promotion for Fiend was long. It was like
Mhm.
over 2.5 months, which is unusual for me. It just kept going on and on. Um, but you know how it is. Once you write a book and the promotion's over, you kind of take it out of your head and put it
Yes.
aside. So can I describe it? It's the log line for it was succession, but horror. But that doesn't really capture what the story is about, which is about whether or not very rich people are evil. Like we all have to wonder. You see how they behave, how they put their own comforts and wishes above the masses of people, right?
Mhm.
and who can do that, right? And so it's about this one particular family, though, the Berisha family. Their ancestry is Albanian, and we can talk about why I picked on Albania.
Mhm.
But they're among the wealthiest family in the world, so they are world citizens. They're very sophisticated, but it just seems like their business succeeds often at the expense of others, whether
Mhm.
it's rivals or that sort of thing. And so there's always been this sort of rumor about them that maybe they have some help, that there's maybe something extra at their bidding, which of course they laugh at because we're all modern people here. But that's the premise. What if this very wealthy, successful family is wealthy and successful because they have something supernatural and evil at their bidding? And so we sort of explore the nature of evilness in wealthy people. And it was a
Yeah.
lot of fun.
And there's also so much of toxic family dynamics in here. So, what kind of interested you in exploring these very love hate relationships within a family?
Well, I think all families have them to a degree.
Mhm.
But I had a very weird family growing up, and, very, very, very domineering father, and I'm a little older than probably most of the folks who are gonna listen to your podcast, and, I came from a time where, the gender roles were maybe a lot more differentiated. Women really did not have the opportunities that we have today, even though it seems sometimes like we're going backwards in time. Um, in this family, it's still very much the men rule and the women are in supporting roles. And even though one of the children, the middle child, thinks she's the best suited to run the family and run the business, and really no one would argue with her, there is no way they are going to put her in charge, even though her brother is the weaker candidate for it. But it's the fact that she doesn't understand that. She's young, and she
Mhm.
doesn't understand that just because you're gifted doesn't mean you're going to get what you deserve. Something that I think most women know
Yes.
in their lives, right? So yeah, there's not only um there's the issues of patriarchy
Mhm.
and matriarchy and gender roles and all that kind of stuff and family dynamics, in addition to this, you know, wealth discrepancy issue as well. I mean, there's a lot stuffed in there for a little book.
I would say so. And I now that you mentioned it, I do wanna know, why did you make them Albanian?
Okay, so Albania, which I mentioned in the book, is often described as the birthplace of the blood feud.
Oh.
And I did work with some Albanians a long time ago in the 90s during the Balkans War, when the conflict spilled over to Kosovo, which is ethnic
Mhm.
Albanian. And so I got to work with these folks, and they do have incredible tempers. Like, you do not want to cross an Albanian. And I thought, if the opportunity ever comes up, I'll just use that. It helped me sort of anchor the family, and it gave them a certain character, a certain flavor, so
Mhm.
I could bring in the Orthodox Christianity
Mhm.
aspect to it and all that. So that's why. It's not that I dislike
Mhm.
Albanians. It actually is rooted in experience.
Interesting. Well, kind of going back to the discussion of kind of gender roles and women in horror, as a woman in the horror world, do you think it is more difficult to get your work out there and grab readers in general, and has that changed over time?
This is a really interesting subject. And who was it? Sadie Hartman and I did an article
I
together,
read that
which came
article.
out, yeah, in the LA Review of Books. And I really credit her because she kind of at the end, kind of said something that made me a little braver. And as we were editing it, I stuck something in. When I started, maybe naively, because also I didn't think of myself as a horror writer. I'm
Mhm.
not one of these people that, grew up on canon. I haven't read every single Stephen King book. I don't watch horror movies. I had a different life.
Mhm.
I was working many wars actually
Mhm.
in the 90s. Anyway, I didn't have time for horror movies. So w- I was welcomed so much that at the time I felt like maybe it was a little more equal
Mhm.
than when my first books came out, which was 2011. First one was 2011, so it's like 2011 to 2014 or something,
Mhm.
which were not horror either. But at that time, paranormal romance was really big, and
Mhm.
that was probably the closest kin to it. And boy, the horror people hated paranormal romance people. Yeah, I'd go to these conventions and these bald-headed guys in black t-shirts would just want to spit on you, if they thought you were really, they were so rude and obnoxious. And
Oh.
I think that's why more women at that time just didn't feel welcome. But Sadie described it too in that article, how unwelcome she felt when she tried to break in on the other side, not as a novelist, but as a reviewer and
Mhm.
just a figure in the community. I'd have to say lately, and I don't know if it's just because of the changing political climate in this country, which has started treating women more like second class or made it more acceptable to treat women like second class citizens. I've been feeling it a little bit more. Not that men in the community aren't supportive, but they're supportive of male writers in a way that you don't see them being supportive of female writers, even though I would argue there's just as much talent there.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
honestly, it's kind of the way of the world, right? I mean, I know it was certainly true when I was growing up, but you see it today still, where we're trained to idolize men and, kind of give them the benefit of the doubt sometimes for their
Mhm.
bona fides, right? Whether they're as smart or as capable as they are being positioned to be. Whereas we tend to be more critical or suspicious of women if they're being touted as being authoritative. We don't
Mhm.
necessarily accept them as easily as we do men. And if you're a minority, if you're older, it just makes it that much harder, I think.
Mhm.
So sadly, yeah, I wish people could be more aware of their unconscious biases,
Mhm.
but that's why they're unconscious, I suppose.
Yeah, I also see some female writers who write stories about women. They say, "Oh, those stories are for women. Men aren't interested in those." I see that a lot still, which I'm always like, everybody should read books by anybody. It shouldn't matter necessarily who wrote it.
That's very true. I feel it very strongly on the spy novels
Mm.
because spy novels, I don't know if the audiences are the same, but you can say that the audience for spy novels is more men. It's like one of the
Mhm.
few categories where there are more male readers than female readers for whatever reason. And they don't read books by women. And I think
Mhm.
they especially don't read books by women with female leads. It's funny because men can write books with female leads and men will read those books. You see where I'm getting at.
Yep.
So I do think to a degree there's probably that. Most of my horror novels are have multiple narrators, like
Mhm.
4 to 6. So, I'm trying to think. I mean, The Hunger skewed a little bit more female. The Fervor definitely skewed more female. Probably same thing with The Deep. It skewed more female, but there were male
Mhm.
narrators also within, point of view characters within the book. So maybe that made them a little bit more acceptable?
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, it's still a tough question, and we don't have the answer.
We don't. Can you think of a good way to try to capture more data though that would sort of help us? Like, is there something we can do
Mm.
with StokerCon, do a survey
Oh.
or
I'm always a fan of surveys. I'm an epidemiologist by training, so surveys, yes, all the surveys.
oh, oh, that's good to know. Maybe let me think about this. Be good to gather a little data.
That would also be super interesting to analyze.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do that.
yeah. Let's think about this. The other thing I noticed, I don't think I went to Stoker. Did I go? Yeah, I did go to StokerCon last year. That was in Stanford, right? Boy, it really skewed younger
Interesting.
among because I go to Thriller Fest, I go
Mm,
to VoucherCon, I go to cons of a couple other genres because of the spy novels. And there, it definitely skews older, more white haired people and stuff.
mhm,
StokerCon, definitely a lot more younger people there, which is amazing. It's so energizing.
mm,
It's not the same conceptions and preconceived
mhm.
notions and stuff everywhere. It was great.
Yeah, we're getting more and more new readers into horror. This is great. It's what we
It
want.
is great. Yeah, and that's because horror is so broad. It's not the
Mhm.
same story over and over again. If you looked at the old days, the golden age, of the paperback horror novels and stuff, they're the same stories being told over and over again. Not so
Mm.
much today.
Mhm. Yeah, I always tell people that when they ask me, why I write horror, because it is so broad. There's so many different stories. I mean, you can read three horror books and you have read almost three completely different genres.
Yes, that's true. But also it addresses the things that we're concerned with, right?
Mhm.
Like I am concerned with, gender disparity.
Mhm.
Because I've had to live through it. I know how
Mhm.
women are discriminated against. And you see what's going on today. What other genre can you write about that, in a
Mhm.
truthful way? Chick
Mhm.
lit? No. Not really in mystery or suspense either.
Mhm.
So, yeah,
Horror's the way to go.
sadly, yes, because we live in horrible times.
Well, kind of going off of that, why do you think horror more broadly just matters? Why are we drawn to it and what is its purpose?
It is interesting, like, how fundamental it is, right?
Mhm.
Everybody gets drawn to a horror story, and so many of the stories that sort of capture us, especially when you're young. I mean, that was true for me. I say it all the time. I read, like, a lot of Edgar Allan Poe when I was very, very
Mhm.
young. Did I understand it? No, but there was something in it that just attracted me, the terror of the world sort of
Mhm.
laid bare on a very personal level, but it can be at a higher level. And that universality of the horrible, we're all going to experience it. So it's something that everybody is curious about and everybody is drawn to. So, there's a big part of that. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, there's just this cultural conditioning, right? That as you get older, you're told, that's not a suitable thing for you to be drawn to,
Mhm.
unless you don't care, what people think of you. It's very hard to buck that.
It is. I always tell people that horror is my therapy because I have a lot of fears. If I write about them, they feel more manageable. They feel more conquerable because I'm thinking them through in a way that, if I get scared, I just close the computer. Or if you're reading a book and you get scared, you just close it. And I think that helps more than anything, honestly.
Yeah, I've heard people say that. If you've seen any interviews with me, you've probably heard me say, I'm not really afraid of a lot of things, and that's because of spending a lot of times researching genocides and mass atrocities and stuff like that, and where you're seeing 5,000 neighbors rise up and killing 5,000 of their neighbors overnight, right?
Mhm.
So there's a lot of things that don't scare me, frustrate me, yes, but so I don't really, I guess, maybe identify with that in quite the same way, but it helps
Mhm.
me deal with my frustrations.
Yes.
If somebody is being a total asshole and I can't kill him in real life, but I can kill him in a story.
Yes. I love doing that. It's so satisfying.
It is so satisfying. It is so satisfying.
Well, I'm going to ask you what I think is probably the most difficult question, which
Uh-oh.
is what is your favorite horror book and why? And I know mine changes month to month, so you can just give me, if you want, the last great horror book you read.
Oh gosh, it is really hard. Because there's so many good ones out there. Um, I The Reformatory by Tanana Reeve, I thought that was amazing, especially because she hadn't written a novel in a long time. She'd been writing short stories and working on scripts and that sort of thing. So, to come back after a big hiatus and knock it out of the park like that, also historical horror.
Mhm.
So, and I really loved Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. I mean, Paul is such an amazing writer, and he does something that, he's kind of genre defying in
Mhm.
a lot of ways and gets into a headspace that not a lot of writers could do and pull off.
Mhm.
So I always look forward to his stories. How about that? I'll just stop there
That's
for now.
perfect. No, those are two great recommendations. So everybody go read those two. And we talked a little bit about this already, but what's next on the horizon for you? I know you have Incarnate coming out in September. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and then what you might have also in the works?
So Incarnate is the story of a Gen Zer
Mm.
young girl who is entering the workforce. And I know that's like a big worry for that generation because this is like the worst time to be entering the workforce in anybody's history. Just horrible. But she does manage to get a job. She went to school to become a visual effects artist, and she hooks up with this visual effects artist who is revolutionizing basically deep fakes. And this is all based on a real person who I reached out to and told him I'm writing this book, and he never got back to me. So I don't want to use his name because I don't want him to sue me after the fact. But all that technology part is real
Mm.
anyway. And as she becomes immersed in this, though, it releases something within her that is within a lot of us, I think. But it raises the issue of, is it making her a more evil person? The whole
Mm.
premise for it was the picture of Dorian Gray for the 21st century. I always
Ah.
loved the story picture of Dorian Gray, at least I thought I did, until I went back to read it. And then I realized this does not translate very well to modern times. Because, his premise, Oscar Wilde's premise, was that we should give ourselves over to hedonism, which, was kind of a revolutionary idea at the time, especially because he was gay and,
Mm.
that wasn't accepted by society. And I just couldn't make that translate to modern times. But there are other things about social media and what it's done to change us in a relatively short amount of time. That technology has really changed um, what it means to be human. And so
Huh.
that's kind of what the story's about.
That sounds awesome. I mean, even just thinking about my own life, social media wasn't really a thing when I was in high school. I am so happy that that wasn't the case. You know what I mean? I mean, I can't imagine what kids these days have to deal with all the social media. I mean, there are so many horror stories you could tell about that.
Yes. Yeah. And it was hard not to,
Mhm.
well, we'll see what they think of what the kids think about it. But the audience for the book is not necessarily Gen Zers, even
Mhm.
though the main character is a Gen Zer. Hopefully, it's for anybody who finds themselves sort of mystified at
Mhm.
how we ended up here because of this technology that was supposed to be a kid's toy when it came
Yeah.
out. Right?
Yeah. And that's September 2026, September this year.
Yep, September this year. Yep.
Awesome.
So what else is going on? I think there's going to be a couple anthologies with stories of mine in them coming out this year. One is Silent Nightmares, which Michael Bailey and Chuck, I'm going to screw up his name, Palahniuk, the guy who
Yeah, yeah,
wrote
yeah. Chuck
them.
Palahniuk?
Yes, good, good on you. Um, they're editing. I think that comes out the end of the year, and I think I'm having a story in the Big Bad Book of Kaiju, which
Ooh.
Jonathan Mabry is editing, and I think that's coming out this year. I don't know, but I'm also working on a spy novel for Thomas and Mercer. That probably won't be out till next year.
Nice. So you're not very busy, clearly.
I really like to keep busy, and we have some TV shows in production, and I'm sorry, in pre-production, and some really big news that I can't release yet, but just
Oh.
came in a couple days ago that's mind bending.
Oh, come on. What a
And
teaser.
yeah, it's a Hollywood thing, so they're really weird about what you can say and when you can say it.
I will
Yeah.
keep my eyes peeled for announcements on that front.
Thank you.
Well, as we end up here, what is your advice for aspiring authors who want to have a career like yours?
Oh, well, one thing you don't want a career like mine. And this is very controversial, I'd say, but unless the business changes a lot, if you want to develop an audience, you can't jump around genres like I have.
Mhm.
It's really bad. Like I would probably be a lot more popular than I am if I had just stuck with one genre. But I was in a genre that died. I mean, even when my first book in it sold, it was already starting, the tents were folding, right? So I had to sort of move out of that, and I was lucky enough to be able to do it. But I do talk to writers, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I've written this. I want to write this horror story, but the next one's going to be a police procedural." And I'm like, "Fine, as a writer, write whatever you want, but for your career, an editor is not going to be happy to hear that you suddenly want to jump to this other category." And you really have to think about it. Does it make sense? So, for instance, I
Mm.
write spy novels and horror novels, and the Venn diagram of readers for those two things does not overlap very much, right? Um, So you just need to think those things through because you want to try to bring your readers with you and
Mhm.
not lose them because you put out a book that they have absolutely no interest in.
That is very good advice. Well, thank you so much. This was absolutely fascinating, and I know everybody wants to know where they can find you and keep up with you and your work.
That would be excellent. The best way is to subscribe to my newsletter, which is on Substack. So if you just look up Alma Katsu Substack, it'll take you there. Because as you know, social media is very unreliable right now in terms of whether or not somebody who's following you is going to see all the things that you put out. So I do very little really on social media except when the book comes out. If you really want to find out what's going on, and I also give books away and all kinds of fun stuff, just subscribe to the newsletter. That would be excellent and I would appreciate it very, very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.